Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next episode of Storyteller Studio. My name is Eric Taylor, and tonight I am here with a bunch of wonderful people, three of whom you know very well because they're here every week, one of whom you'll know better by the end. We are going to start with our resident game beast, giving an introduction, however.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I'm excited to be here.
We do like when Sarah's excited about things. We're going to jump across to the other pretty one on the stream, Chantel.
Oh, it's me. Great. Hi, I am Chantel B. You can find me at Chantel B on Twitter. You can also find Sarah on Twitter, though Sarah never looks at Twitter. Her @ is Sarah No Tweet. There's a reason for that, but still at her, because it's fun.
Indeed. We will then move to the first of our handsome people on the stream, with our longtime standing member, Matt.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matt. Orcish at Orcish1_83 is where you can find me on Twitter, and hopefully you do, and we can be pals.
And last but certainly not least is our special guest for this evening. He's the one, he's the only on stream at present, Sam.
Hey, I'm Sam. You can find me on Twitter at @_RealSammyP.
Tell us a little bit about you, Sam.
I am Australian-based performer, voice actor. Recently been doing streaming in like role-playing games. I ran a game last year. I'm currently in a game with Chantel, actually, called Unlawful Disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been a lot of fun. I recently recorded a few podcasts for various things that I'll be showing up at some point. That I don't actually know when they're coming out, but I'll try to keep people informed when they do. So I did a Disney versus Disney debate, trying to discover which was the best animated Disney movie, and I recorded a character for the Penny Peep Show podcast for one of their upcoming shows.
Awesome. So the answer to your first question is The Incredibles. Although that's technically Pixar, so I guess I don't know if that qualified into your debate or not.
The debate, I did two debates.
Mm-hmm.
So for the upcoming, this is the third round of the debates,
okay.
And one of them that I was debating that there's teams of two at this point, but one of them was Aladdin versus Toy Story 2,
Mm-hmm.
with me debating for Aladdin, and the other one was the Goofy movie versus The Incredibles, with me debating for the Goofy movie.
We can never have Sam on again.
I may have ruined The Incredibles for myself.
We can never have Sam on again. This will be Sam's only visit.
We were literally talking about after we recorded the episode about how, because we've had to like deep dive into trying to tear apart these films, that it's like films that we previously really loved are now like I don't want to watch Incredibles at the moment. I'm like, now when I watch it, I just see problems that I'm like, but I love this movie.
My heart is broken. My heart is broken.
When we're not doing this, let me tell you the line of logic where Bill Parr is an abusive husband who has definitely laid hands on his wife.
Oh 100%. No! Oh no!
So yeah, that's the world I now live in. It's dark. It's bleak. It's not pleasant.
Yep. Nope. Sam is dead to me, Chantel. Sam is dead.
All right. Well, this has been fun, guys. Bye.
As long as he doesn't turn off his camera and mess up the scenes, then he really will be dead to me. However, this evening, now that we're all traumatized by Sam's podcast that hasn't come out yet, we are discussing one-shots versus campaigns. Part of the reason we brought Sam on is word on the streets, Sam's pretty infamous for one-shots. So we're going to chat some about one-shots. And first of all, I'm going to jump up to Sarah, and I'm going to pick on Sarah because I don't feel like I make Sarah talk enough. I have received that feedback in the Do Respite email. Make Sarah talk more on Storyteller Studio. So, you're going to have to talk more this evening. What is a one-shot versus what is a campaign?
One shot is a game that you can play typically in one go, whether your group normally plays for 3 hours or a little bit longer than that. Normally it's a story that you will start and wrap up in one session, versus a campaign is a story that when your session is over, the story is still continuing. It might come to kind of a stopping point, but the next game that you play will still tie into the last session you had, and the story will have usually the same characters. Not, I've read of some games where it ties in, but you then have different characters, but usually you have the same characters and the story continues.
Okay. Matt or Sam or Chantel, do you have anything to add to the definition of one shot?
A one shot, it's one story, and this is where we could get into a little bit of a gray area, because Eric, you've talked a little bit about running campaigns that are episodic, where you have a mini story in each session. I feel like that's not part of the definition of a one shot. A one shot is you've got these characters one time, they're doing one thing, and once the job or the adventure is complete, it's finished, and we can all just kind of enjoy that moment as the moment it was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can definitely do a one shot that leaves a possibility, like the end of a film that leaves it open for a sequel kind of thing. But the one shot in and of itself does still need to be
Self-contained.
Whereas session by session, when you're doing a campaign, you can definitely leave things to, it's like, we're just going to cut it mid-combat, we're going to continue on next week kind of thing in the campaign, where the one shot has to have an ending. It has to come to a conclusion at some point.
But then here I come with the dissenting view, as usual. I have to question whether or not because to me a one-shot is, it has an arc, has a beginning, middle, end. If you were to take that story by itself, it would stand alone quite comfortably and quite happily. Whereas a campaign is, if you don't have the prior information, you can't possibly move forward in the story. You're going to miss stuff. So to me, those would be that's where I would draw the line of whether it's a one-shot or a campaign. And I mean, that works a lot more fluidly in the streaming world.
I have had experiences, and probably each of the folks on the present here today have had an experience where a one shot turned into a campaign because it was enjoyable. We liked our characters, we had invested in our characters, and so something that we would call a one shot was just episode one of a campaign to gather those characters.
When I think of a one shot, I make a food analogy. A one shot is like a breakfast sandwich. It is all in one self-contained thing, and you have your beginning, middle, and end. You have your bacon, egg, and cheese, or your sausage, egg, and cheese, and your croissant and whatever. And you eat it in one sitting. You don't eat part of a sandwich. You tend to, like, a breakfast sandwich isn't good partway through, which does lend some dissonance to the analogy with, with regards to what you said, Matt, where you can turn it into something else. I mean, a breakfast sandwich, I guess, becomes your appetizer. But I always think of them as a self-contained kind of thing, where when it's done, it's gone, you move on. Why, then, and we're getting some reports of weird audio, so I've tweaked a couple things on my end. Let me know how it is now. I've turned myself down a little bit. I've turned everybody else up. Hopefully it evens out. But maybe I just have a better mic. I don't know. No, I don't. Why do we play one-shots, then? If the goal is to tell stories, right, and the goal is to get invested in a story, which I think, especially here at Do Respite, is what we feel, why do we play one-shots?
So, have you seen the movie The Truman Show? I'm guessing you have, right? No? Gosh. So essentially, it's this orchestrated like world. So it's not real, but the creators of this kind of reality show type of environment try to steer the main character toward things and away from things, but eventually he gets, spoiler alert, right, gets out of this staged environment. And so I feel like for a GM that is comfortable playing God and saying no, you can't go that way, they can maintain control over 6 sessions, possibly longer. But for a GM that doesn't want to play God and wants characters to be authentic to themselves and their team dynamic, it can be a little bit hard to get 6 sessions or longer. Also, a one shot can be a lot of fun without a whole lot of thinking. You've got one storyline to keep in your head, and you don't have to have a scribe taking notes and reporting back minutes at the beginning or right when you convene for session. I also, one shots have a very near and dear place in my heart because Eric uses those as a recruiting tool. So I didn't know whether I would like tabletop role playing games, and I said, okay, well, I can be a little bit nerdy for like one evening, and what have I lost if I don't like it? And I loved it. And so that's one of the really great reasons for a one shot as well.
I mean, in terms of telling stories, like short stories exist and novels exist, like they exist, and it's fine having both. They ultimately serve different purposes and can do different things. So it's not like you're not telling a story when you're doing a one shot. It's still sitting around a table. You're still doing this sort of like this narrative with how many people you've got playing. It's just, it can be a little bit more, as you said, like a bit more directed, because you are sort of like, we need to hit certain points at certain times. But at the same time, there's definitely ways to do it where it's still as open-ended. It's just everyone is aware there's going to be a conclusion this session rather than down the line.
I know for me, I use one shots quite regularly. I use one shots as a palate cleanser. We hit the end of an arc, everybody's kind of worn. We want to think, okay, where are we going to go next? What are we going to do next? Let's play something else for a little bit. We've been playing a high fantasy game. Let's go play a Western game, or let's go, do a zombie apocalypse game. And it's a short 3-4 hours. And then the next session, you're back into what you were doing, but you get kind of this palate cleanse that helps you reset your brain and reestablish priorities. Matt mentioned recruiting tool. We've had pickup game one shots where I have just been like, I really want to run something and I want to hang out with people and play an RPG, but these aren't people I can dedicate to a campaign. I'm just going to send out a call and let's do a one shot and see who shows up. And I think for a lot of people, the main place they see one shots is conventions, because you are often in that, you're under that structure, right? You have those limits in a convention setting where it needs to be a self-contained story within your 4-hour block.
It's also good. I've definitely used it to see if a game is a good fit for your group before committing to a full campaign. So it's sort of like, I've got a couple of ideas. We could play this game. We could play that game. But instead of just jumping in, you can just be like, hey, let's try it. Let's just get a feel for it. You get a sense of the mechanics. You get a sense of what it feels like around the table. And then afterwards, everyone can be like, yeah, that was a lot of fun. I want to do, this every week. Or it could be like, yeah, it was fine. We can do it again later, but maybe not as a continuous thing, or however it sort of shakes out. Yeah, sure. So you can definitely sort of trial things and in much more short format.
Yeah. In that same vein, you can mess with characters. I know that Sarah and Matt may find this hard to believe, but there are people who make their own characters for one-shots. That's not how my one-shots run. You come to a table most of the time and I hand you, like once, Chantel. most of the time I hand you a pre-gen. That's most of the time how my one-shots work. And when we talk about systems that work with one-shots, we'll get into that. But I hand you a pre-gen. There's a list of them. You get to pick one, pull one out of a hat, and whatever. And then you go. And you can do crazy, more tropey, more stereotypical things. There's also the opportunity to try more off-the-wall stuff because there's no consequences to an extent. I have seen that happen with a lot of my one-shot games where people who are really concerned about character death, people who are really concerned about story continuity will do something completely off the handle because they have that freedom. And to me, and I know that Chantel will dissent in opinion with me, but all you gotta do is look at last Wednesday here on Do Respite and look at Shadow the Cone. I do have curiosity if we were playing a vastly longer term game of that group of teenagers, if Janelle would have shoved her fellow cultist off of that ladder in session 1. And so, maybe she would have, maybe she wouldn't have. But I think there are people who will make decisions based upon a one-shot. So in that same token, let's jump to the next version of this question. One-shots are awesome. We've established that. You can do cool stuff. You get to play cool characters. You get to try new systems, whatever. Why do we play campaigns instead of a one-shot?
I actually prefer campaigns to one-shots, just as a general note. One-shots are great because you can test out a character or a system, and you can just sort of spend time off the cuff with friends, hanging out. I like to get involved with my characters. I like to learn how they tick. I like to think about how they relate to the other characters. I like to think about a lot of things to do with story-related depth that really not necessarily anyone else is interested in. And for me, the only way to really explore that idea is through a campaign.
I would say a lot of those same elements appeal to me. You want to be able to develop a story and a storyline, and you also want to be able to see how your character can grow and how your team can grow in cohesiveness and capability, right? So you'll have advances where you're becoming more expert at the things that you do together as a team. And I really like being able to see that development. I'm big into one shots. I love them, but probably my favorite story was a campaign where we were traveling all over the place and discovering different layers of depth in the plot and subplots that play into it. And I really enjoyed that.
I think that's like as you're saying, depth is the big one. It's like you can do a lot with one shots, but it is mostly only ever going to be this sort of this surface level thing. You can't get too far. I mean, I say that there's definitely games where you can, which are designed to go to only to be this short form, and they can sort of, because that's what they're designed to do with that in mind, they can do a lot within that limited amount of time. But ultimately, just by sheer fact that you're going to have more time to delve into things, campaigns are going to win out in how you discover and learn about not only the characters that you're playing with, but the characters that you are playing, like the person you have created for this game. Like you'll discover things that you didn't necessarily know going in about this person as you play. And I love that. I that's one of my favorite parts, is those character moments of role playing just in general. So campaign definitely allows for that. Mm-hmm. Much more than one shots are ever going to.
Which is interesting, because in my personal experience, the characters I love most were one-shot characters. The characters I fell in love with, the characters I have wished I could continue to play, the characters who stand out in my head are characters I played in a one-shot. Because, admittedly, I think it's because their story is unfinished. Their potential is unresolved. And so with characters that I've played until a campaign conclusion, or characters that have died, or characters that have played until a campaign has died through a different episode's discussion. Their story's done. You know, it's the sitcom finale. It's the end of the drama. It's whatever. Whereas it's the Firefly cancellation in the middle for me. And so I hang on to one-shot characters in my head, but I'm not a person who will bring them into other campaigns because they don't fit there. So for me, it's this interesting kind of conundrum. I'm going to looking at the show notes, I'm going to hit the next question a little bit later down the line when we get into a little bit more stories. But let's talk about systems with relation to one-shots. As we mentioned, I run a lot of one-shots, and anybody who's watched anything on Do Respite knows I run a lot of Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds does campaigns great, but Savage Worlds does one-shots amazingly. Because if I hand you a pre-gen, specifically, or if you build a character from scratch even, you are assigned a set of hindrances. You pick a set of hindrances or are given a set of hindrances, and those stand as this is how your character functions. And I have never seen somebody that I've handed a Savage Worlds character look at a Savage World character and go, I don't know how I'm going to play this. Whereas I have seen that in D&D one-shots. I have seen that in Pathfinder one-shots because they're more nebulous. So are there systems in our minds as players or as game masters that do one-shots better or worse than the other, and why?
I mean, I think you're sort of like any game that has that sort of, I said, hindrances or like flaws or even merits, really. Any like when you get like where it's not just, you know, stats to swing your sword. It is you get things like you get minuses this because you have this, and it sort of gives you that much more clear cut. It's like, oh, I know that this person is, I'm playing an alcoholic gunslinger who, you know, pines for a lost love, and it's like, all right, like, let's go. Where it's not just, here is a fighter. I don't think, like, for me, I don't think there's really a game that can't do a one shot. Like anything where you can play session by session, you can get a story done in that. So you can have beginning, middle, and end within a session. But obviously, definitely games like that, like Savage World, that have this sort of built-in character, like defining aspect to it. So any kind of fate system will probably be similar. I guess it's like the World of Darkness games to an extent, though they can be a bit dense for one shots. I haven't tried 5th edition, but they still have merits and flaws. So you can still do that. You can still have that setup where it's like you can look at these things and they give you very clear role-playing notes, essentially, or character jumping off points. Anything that gives you a character hook built into the character that's just going to appear on the sheet is going to be something you can easily do as a one-shot, because it just gives the player what they need, I guess, to do that. But at the same time, like, you can ultimately do it with it. I can't think of a game that would be bad at one-shots, I guess, like specifically bad.
And I personally think that Vampire / the World of Darkness games is awful for one-shots. I don't feel like you can get the depth that system's lore and that system's world pushes at you resolved in a one-shot in a way that to me is satisfactory.
Sure.
And I don't personally care for Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder in a one-shot setting. But part of that is the time requirement. One of the reasons I avoid D&D, as we know on this channel, is combat length is ridiculous, and I don't care for it. When we did a D&D one-shot at Gen Con, myself, Sarah, and Matt, it was 4 hours, and we spent, 2/3 of that time doing 2 combat scenarios, and we skipped one because we outsmarted it through roleplay. But that was all it was. Is it was like, are we here to tell a story? Or are we here to do combat? And I guess it depends on what your group, but for me, I don't find D&D one-shots or World of Darkness style one-shots satisfying. So I guess it's subjective, where to me, I don't feel like they do them well.
I mean, that's going to be the same for any, like, that's not a one-shot specific thing. Like, even with a campaign, like, if the people around your table aren't enjoying the game you're playing, it doesn't matter what story you're telling. It's like, you need to find a game everyone's going to enjoy, and because games do different things, they feel different, do have different requirements, different focuses. And so, as you're saying, like, you're not interested in doing a long drawn out combat, so D&D isn't going to attract you as much as, say, something else that does that much more efficiently. And that's going to be something which, particularly doing it for a convention, can be trickier, because then you're just sort of like, you're just kind of just throwing out a game and being like, gosh, I hope people come and do this. But if you're doing it just with friends, you can have a much better sense of what's going to work. And I think it's sort of like, I make the point that, like, I don't think any game's going to do it badly, but that's definitely not to say that all games do it well.
Right.
I think would be my sort of a clarification I'd want to throw out.
I think from my perspective, the reason why I would not run Vampire as a one-shot is because by the time you've got hold of the mechanics, if you're trying to play the game with new people or people that don't necessarily know the mechanics, if you try to bring them into that in a one-shot, they're not, number one, then they're not going to understand the mechanics. It's just too complicated. There's too much happening. There are too many dice for too many different reasons. It's not something that will be necessarily fun. D&D depends on what you want. If you enjoy combat, if you enjoy the nitty-gritty of all of those mechanics, then yes, you'll enjoy it. You can do it that way, especially if you love dice like I do. That would be good too. Savage Worlds works because if the intention is to tell a story, a self-contained, very quick story, then you can do that, and you don't need to roll that many dice, really. You don't need to do a great deal. And then you've got games like The Land Whispers, where you don't roll any dice. You have a deck of cards, and the manual tells you what question you're trying to answer next, and you're just telling a very quick self-contained story with any number of people. The rest of the people around the table don't really need to know the game, don't really need to know anything. So I think it depends on if you're playing one-shots multiple times with people you know, or if you're playing one-shots multiple times with people who have played that game before. I mean, having played Vampire for some number of months, I still don't think I could go into it on a one-shot basis. I actually still don't think I know enough of the mechanics or how they work in order to do that. And that's having played for a while. Could do it with D&D, have done it with D&D, could do it with the Forged in the Dark system. That works quite well for one-shots, but it's about picking the right game, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's pretty important to the concept, and it's why I think that there are systems that, while every system can do it and may not necessarily do it poorly, as Sam is saying, there are systems that do it better. And in the average setting, barring, hey, we're going to do a vampire one-shot with a group of people who play vampire all the time, or we're going to heavens, a Traveler 2200 or a regular Traveler or whatever, or a Heavens and L5R, where that's even denser mechanics than Vampire, it's doable if you know your stuff. But Chantel has come, and Sarah has come, and Matt has come, and had no idea how to play Savage Worlds. I have come and sat down at a table with no idea how to play, what is that system? AGE, the Adventure Gaming Engine system, the Fantasy Age system. Came and sat down with no idea how to play that. And walked out of there still having grokked the mechanics by the end, because they're more simple and they're mechanics that don't get in the way. Whereas I feel like there are systems that are so mechanics heavy, where part of the joy for a lot of people is the mechanics of the system, and that's great, that's wonderful, but they get in the way of learning the system in a one kind of shot scenario to me. And Sarah, I think we're gonna pick on you since you've stared at us for the past 10 minutes or so. That was your feeling on D&D, because when I pitched, hey, come play with us, let's start a game group, what do we want to play? Savage Worlds 5th edition, which one? We ran one shots of both. And correct me if I'm wrong, you felt like there was one that just had mechanics that were easier to grok.
Yeah, I like Savage Worlds better because I felt like I was getting the hang of the numbers, and math is not my thing. So I was getting the hang of what to do when and what to roll when better than D&D. And then there was that hour-long combat, and I had a melee character, and all I could think to do is she runs up and hits him again and again and again. Now, obviously, I could have done a little bit better. It was my first game. But eventually, I got kind of tired of that. So there was that. Also, I think you had me watch, I'm trying to think, I think it was Happy Jacks, and they were doing a Supers game, and I think they were using the Cypher system, or
Cortex
it
Plus.
was, yeah, that's what it was. So I watched them, and I love the story they did, and you suggested, hey, why don't we try this system with our group? And I was like, no, please don't do that to me, because I've been watching, like, I watched their whole, and I think you suggested this, I was halfway through their storyline. I'm like, and I still don't understand why they're rolling what dice when. And admittedly, they weren't teaching the system, but they were doing a pretty good job of saying what they were rolling when and why. And I was still completely lost.
Mhm.
And by that point, I was just paying attention to the story and the role playing, and I had given up on trying to figure out why they were rolling what they were rolling. So
Yeah.
I like Savage Worlds because I understand the dice and what to roll, and I think I get it now.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about some systems that we personally feel are great for one shots. We'll jump to Matt, who will tell us a little bit more about why he loves Savage Worlds for one shots, because he hasn't played a whole ton of systems, but we'll let Matt get some words in because that's important. Then we'll talk about a couple others. So Matt, tell us about your one shot experience. I believe is Savage Worlds and D&D 4th edition and D&D and a hacked version of D&D 5th edition.
Yeah. Yep. And I people who've watched multiple Storyteller studios know that I am into story development and character development, and combat. Okay, like I can get into it for story and character purposes. So for the fact that you can do slightly more adventurous or reckless things in Savage Worlds, so multiple action type of mechanics and things like that, I really like Savage Worlds for those. I don't necessarily want to invest a whole lot of time or math into a combat sequence, and so that's essentially why Savage Worlds is a good fit for me.
So I've done one shots in Savage Worlds, 4th edition D&D, D&D 3.5, D&D 2.0, D&D 5e, Pathfinder, Fate, the original Cortex Plus. The list continues into oblivion. Certain system stands out. The Land Whispers that we have here on the channel. It's a great video. Go watch it. Fiasco, which is built to be a one-shot, but so's the Land Whispers. Weave, which, if you don't know Weave, augmented reality kind of game, uses your phone as well as some dice. Has a very tarot card bent. You randomly generate characters with certain sets of things. it is designed to be run as a campaign. There are advances, there are those things. I find it works better for a one-shot, personally, than a campaign, and I really, really, really like it for a one-shot. But I know that there are other things on our list that I haven't played, that Chantel has played, and that Sam has played. So let's talk a little bit about some of these other games that are great for a one-shot, and specifically why they're great for a one-shot.
Well, you've got games like Dread and 10 Candles. Both of those, 10 Candles is actually a one-shot game. The idea is that the characters die at the end. Mechanically, that's actually how it's built. You can't win. You cannot win. I mean, you can't win really a TTRPG, but it's designed to be not a campaign. Although I know Geek and Sundry have been playing it as if it is one. I haven't watched it, but I've seen it. Dread, another game that can be played as a campaign, but is a phenomenal one-shot game. And it's great because you don't have to, like the rest of the players really don't have to learn anything. And they give you quick adventures in the startup guide saying, hey, person that's going to run the game, here are scenarios, play these scenarios, job done, have fun, pull blocks. We can't call them what they are, which is insert block name here, I guess. It's Jenga.
No copyrighted terms. I have tried my local sort of gaming convention where we do like a weekend of one shot essentially, and on multiple occasions I have tried to arrange 10 Candles to be played there without being successful yet, because I really want to. I haven't had an actually chance to play it, but I really, really want to give that a go. It's interesting that because both those games are essentially horror themed. So like horror goes kind of, because it does kind of have that, there's gonna come to an end. It's not gonna be great for you, but it's definitely there. That built-in endpoint is there. And we mentioned Fiasco. I added to the list with a couple of games, but one of them is by the same guy who made Fiasco, Jason Morningstar. There's a game called Out of Dodge, which I highly recommend everyone check it out because it's unlike anything else I've played, really. It's designed to be playable in your car while on a road trip. So I actually decided not to play it while driving, but you just set up 4 chairs in like the same position as you would in a car. And it's also designed in such a way that you can only play it properly once. Because it's basically it's a heist. It's basically sort of like you've just done a heist of some description. You've all bundled into the car and you're trying to get away. And you each get, like, your character sheet is just a list of prompts, but it basically says you can't read any of these before you start. No one can look at any of the prompts before you start. Put them in an envelope, don't read it. So I was like trying to set all this stuff. I printed it off and not like looking away, trying to not read any of this information. And then as you play, you read your thing, and most of it's like when X happens, do Y. And so there's these triggering events, and then there's a degree of randomness put into it. So once you've played it through, you've got a rough idea of how those play out. But it's just so unique, and it definitely has an endpoint. You can only play it for so long. And another game that I think is, because it is designed to be played in a one shot, I found it very unique, was Kiss Her Before the World Ends, which is similar to 10 Candles in that it definitely has an endpoint, and it's definitely not going to go well for you necessarily. This is a game by, I just wanted to quickly look that up, Alice Grizzle made this game, and it kind of recommends that you play it with, like, 2 to 4 other people that you trust and can be vulnerable with. And I was like, so you mean strangers at a convention? Let's go. And by the end of this game that I ran, so it's a GMless game that you play, but by the end of it, all four of myself and the three other people around the table were also like sitting going, okay, yeah, cool. We're going to debrief now because we need to. And and I found out one of the people had misunderstood the brief that I'd written and was like very taken off guard by how this game played out, because it's literally designed as the world is ending, for some definition of that. What do you do? What do you do? What regrets do you have at that point, and how do you try and mitigate those? And we just played the scenario from the book, which is essentially you're a team of researchers on a spaceship that's broken and about to, in a collapsing orbit into a sun. And so it's like, yep, you can't be rescued. There's no way to fix the ship. You will then, at the end of this, your ship crashes into a star. Go, and you sort of have to like just play out these scenes, and it uses a lot of like, it keeps things to a specific time. Like you only have 5 minutes to do your scene, and if you go over that 5 minutes, the game says something happens which stops the scene from happening. Move on. Next person does a scene. Next person does a scene. Everyone has desires they're trying to fix, and by the end of it, we were all just emotional wrecks because that's what the game's designed to do. It's supposed to be this melancholy tragedy, but you can't play it in a campaign. A campaign, as I said, has that depth, but what this one does, it allows it to condense it. It does it in a very short space of time. So it's like, we're going to aim for that high emotion that you can't maintain for a long period of time. But because we know we're only going to be here for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, we're just going to hit that really high emotion. We're going to hold on to it, and then we're going to end. And that's the game. And so it does. So Kiss Her Before the World Ends does that beautifully. And again, it's sort of like has a lot of mechanics, which it's a diceless, GM-less system. That some of the mechanics, I was like, yeah, it's fine. Like one scene is 5 minutes, the next scene's 4 minutes. And then when you actually play it out, you're like, oh, that's a huge deal. Like you feel this encroaching end because you don't have as much time anymore. They've cut your time down. They've cut your options down. And in play, everything that just seemed like an interesting choice actually was like, no, they've put so much thought into this. They've really broken this down, and they know what they want to do, and they're able to do it, which is when you have something specifically designed for a one-shot, you get that laser focus, which is fantastic. So those are two games I recommend because they're just very unique, I guess, in the way they play.
Awesome. So let's ask one more question, and then let's talk a little bit about some impactful one-shots. Versus, because everybody has their campaign story, right? Everybody talks about their, I played till I was a 20th level, blah, 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 blah. Like we have those stories, and everybody's heard those stories, and most people don't want to hear those stories anymore. But one-shots are different because they're shorter, and to me, I like hearing one-shot descriptions better than I like hearing a campaign description, because for the same reason Shawnee mentioned, I can't get all the detail that makes a campaign impactful without investing far more time listening to somebody talk about it than I really have. Whereas a one-shot, you can get a lot of it across. So, but let's go back to the idea that one-shots are self-contained breakfast sandwiches stories, right? However, I have heard tale of Sam weaving an entire campaign out of a bunch of self-contained one-shots. We have had games here on the channel where they started out as a one-shot and they became a campaign. I have run games that are essentially comic book issues that come to an end. At the end of a one-shot, that story is self-contained because I never knew if my group was going to get to play again. So it was always, we need to terminate here. We've also had, as Chantel can attest to, the Deep Dark Woods into Wicked Felina situation, where it was a one-shot that became a 3-story campaign for reasons. So let's talk a little bit about that. How do you tie them together? Does it work? Or is it a thing that feels forced when it happens? And I mean, let's start with Matt, since Matt hasn't gotten to talk as much this episode. You've had a couple of times, I think, where we've taken a one-shot game and we've turned it into a multi-section game. Ghostbusters was like that. And Stars That Bind is like that.
Yeah.
Talk to me about those situations. And has it worked, or was it forced?
There are some situations where it works, and those situations, just speaking kind of in my 2020 vision, those times where a one shot growing into a campaign, it worked because there was a balanced set of players, that is to say, or rather characters. So it was a team that worked. It was a team that worked for the tasks at hand or the adventures that they could choose from. And so for Ghostbusters, yes, it was built to be a team because it was kind of Joe Schmoes off the street who, did have varied background that could contribute to swindling people and also killing ghosts with the technology they were given, or trapping ghosts. And so that there that felt natural in a sense because of the episodic element that I was talking about earlier. If you have a storyline that lends itself to discrete interactions with new people, then that can go fairly seamlessly. There's not, the reading of minutes at the beginning of game sessions, because what happened is kind of in character for the bigger storyline. I've been in some where it felt maybe a little bit forced because there were some people who were really into it, some people who weren't, and some people who couldn't come back, and we had to explain that, oh yeah, they got knocked out and they're like out of a full day of, in-game time or whatever. So I have seen a little bit of both. And you posed a question: what are some of the best one shots that you have seen? And there is a one shot that I GM'd for my kids that's probably the most fulfilling one shot for me, because it was the first time they had created characters. It was the first time they had gotten a sense for what tabletop RPG was about. And it was, my son was a centaur and my daughter was a unicorn, and they rescued the missing princess from an orc. And when they realized how gritty a game could be, where they dropped a boulder on the head of an orc and they heard a crunch and they saw a red pool of blood under his head, they were like, wow, this is a rush to be able to see that. So that will end up being a campaign, because they, even I talked in a recent Storyteller studio about life imitates art, and they talk about those characters in everyday conversation about, oh yeah, Sprinkles Daggerhorn would do this. And so that's been a lot of fun. But I think my little kernel of wisdom is when the stars are aligned and a one shot looks like it has the legs required to create a campaign. Put some thought into some stuff that will allow that to be long term, because it can be really rewarding.
What about you, Sarah? It's happened to you a few times. What do you think of when it happens? Do you like it when it happens? Do you hate it when it happens? This is once again your chance to throw me under the bus as your primary GM. Does it work for you?
It can. Like Chantel and Sam said, I think you have to have a one shot where the characters aren't all obviously going to die by the end, because that doesn't work as well. But like with Stars That Bind, because of character decisions and discussions, we kind of dragged that one shot out, whether you liked it or not, because we ran out of time before we ran out of story, and it turned into a two shot. And then I think before the end of the second session, you had already decided this could be cool if we kept doing this, and you could tell that we were all having fun with the setting and the characters. And so by the time we got to what would be the end, you left it open for more. You left it open for a sequel.
Mhm.
So if that's the case, if you have a one shot where like you said, it's one of those stories that could continue, it had kind of satisfying conclusion, but there could be a sequel, there could be more, then it can work. If it's one of those stories where half your party's dead, or the story pretty much ended, like that's the end, happily ever after, or not so happy ever after, then trying to force it to keep going just isn't as satisfying for everybody.
So, if I understand correctly, Sam, you ran a Shadow of the Demon Lord campaign that was a conglomeration of one-shots. And Chantel, if I understand correctly, you played in this campaign, correct? So, talk to me about how you made that work. I don't know anything about Shadow of the Demon Lord besides the fact that it sounds scary because there's a demon lord and a shadow, and shadows are bad, as are demons. Probably worse than shadows. Let's talk about how you made that work and what made that feel unique and feel like a fulfilling experience between the two of you.
So until like just now, I had never thought about it as being a series of strung together one shots. And as soon as you mentioned that, I was like, oh my God, it was a series of strung together one shots. Of course it was. So the thing about Shadows of the Demon Lord, despite it being scary because of shadows, demons, and lords, it's designed. It's by design the way the game. It's doesn't like you don't necessarily have to do this, but the way the book presents it is that you're supposed to play it over 10 or 11 sessions and then it ends. And that every session is its own adventure, and at the end of that session, everyone levels up. So you can start at level 0. By the end, you do another one where you get to level 10, and that's it. And because they are distinct, you can do things where it's like, you start at level, you're the naive farm boy or something, and you end up on this grand adventure, but then the next one is years later, and it's like, yeah, but now you're a trained knight and you've been doing this for a while, and then the next one is years later, and they don't necessarily have to be, but you can definitely do it that way. So it by design has these distinct moments, whereas what I was doing when I was running this game is I had been toying with the idea of trying to do a role-playing game using a lot of elements from the XCOM video game series. So I wanted to incorporate instead of having everyone having their own character, you had a pool of characters that the players would pick from before they started their mission. And so what this obviously meant that every episode, every session we did essentially was one mission. The team was sent out to do something, and then by the end of it, they would either succeed or fail at that mission. I think there was one where I got to the point where like, no, we're going to have to do this over 2 sessions. But in all the other ones, it was just they were its own story. But essentially, because they were all their own unique mission. So on their own, you could pull it out and watch it, and that would be fine because you'd have that beginning, middle, and end. But they were all ultimately to the same goal. They all tied into the ultimate story arc of the campaign. There was still a beginning, middle, and end to the campaign itself. They had recurring characters. I had part of it was I knew that they were going to have to. Part of the story was mostly because we had a limited number of sessions we were going to do. The story I wanted to tell was this organization knowing that discovering there was a threat, discovering who the threat was coming from, and then being ready. By the end of it, the end of the point was you were now ready to potentially move on and confront this problem. But the story arc was mostly finding out what the problem was in the first place. And so each mission was complete on itself, but at the same time, you're getting a little bit more information about the overarching story. You start to go, oh, okay, so this person is a player, is a main person, and they keep coming back. This clue adds to this other clue that we got before. And so it was always kind of like episodic TV. The season had a story, but each episode had to be watchable in its own right. And essentially, that's how I had to sort of think about it to make it work. And particularly because we were doing it as a show on Twitch, we had to sort of keep that in consideration to make sure that each session worked on its own, and people could just jump in and at any point and be able to watch it. So, I personally think it actually worked out well. But like I said, the game is designed to facilitate that. It was a big part of me picking Shadow of the Demon Lord for this game, was because the mechanics enabled me to do what I wanted to do. It lent itself to doing that. Because I had originally looked at Dungeons and Dragons, and ultimately it was like, this is not going to work. But Shadow of the Demon Lord, despite having some very surface level similarities, I often describe the game as being what happens if Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer has a baby. You get Shadow of the Demon Lord. But yeah, it's just basically stringing that aspect of the one shot where the one shot has to be contained in and of itself, but you can still tie it into other things, and that's ultimately what is required. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump in on that one and say the thing that I loved most about that, and what I've come to realize about my engagement with one shots, is unless I'm building the character, I don't think I enjoy one shots very much in the grand scheme of things. And that's purely in the grand scheme of things, because I play a lot of games, and I get to choose whether I prefer campaigns or whether I prefer one shots. And I think those times where I've had pre-generated characters, because I am so story involved, that's been sort of a twisting point for me, where Shadow of the Demon Lord, Sam created some characters, we created other characters, and so we could swap in or out as the character got tired, which character we were going to play. And because we'd seen how the last person played that same character, moving on, we kind of went, oh, those are the characteristics the character has? Give me some of that today. So it's like there's just a menu to pick from.
I made the point. I tried to make it very clear, because I knew that this whole thing where different people are going to play different characters. So I was like, while you are playing that character, it's, for all intents and purposes, it's your character. And there is no requirement for you to try and match what someone else has done. I don't want to put that on you, on anyone. But then I also surrounded myself with performers and actors who are like, no, I want to do that. I want to do that character this person has shown me. I want to do that voice. I want to do that mannerism. And so I was like, all right, well, let's go. And like I said, I rolled up a few characters because the game, there's a lot of random generation when it comes to making the characters in Shadow of the Demon Lord. So just to fill out the roster, I sort of just threw together a couple of characters. At least one of them I was looking at going, oh, this is going to go a certain way. And then it did. But at the same time, it was like just seeing how people interpreted these characters was really interesting for me. I got a lot of enjoyment out of just watching other people just run off with these characters and just have fun with them. That was great.
Sometimes Zoom takes a really long time to unmute my microphone. But okay, so we're closing in on the tail end. This isn't so much of an advice or a learning show this time. This is more of an opinion piece. It's an editorial on how it is. So I'm gonna jump around. I'm gonna hit you each and be like, hey, campaign or one shot, what do you prefer? Give me a brief couple sentences why, and tell me your favorite one shot. and we will go reverse order. Start with the one who's already made her opinion super clear, but we're going to hear it again. Shawnee B, campaign or one shot, and why?
Campaign, character depth, story depth. I feel like it's possibly more random. As much as you can do crazy things in one shots, it feels like you can be more random because you have more time to learn what's normal to then go, oh, I'll do this instead today.
Interesting. I think that's a
instead of
discussion
following
for
a trope. I feel
definitely
like that's a different story.
different discussion. Sam, campaign or one shot, and why? Oh, well, Chantel, you have played one shots. You had fun with one shots.
Oh yeah, I still enjoy
Favorite
them.
one shot.
Oh god. Come back to me. Wait.
That's not how this works.
No. Oh, I thought it might.
It doesn't.
Favorite one shot, and To the Wilds. I just enjoyed creating a story and how deeply focused we became on purely creating the story rather than trying to do anything.
Mm-hmm. Sam, campaigns or one shots?
I think campaign is what I ultimately prefer, but it's sort of because of as the reasons we've already covered, character depth, story, that you can go much deeper, and that those are the parts. The narrative creation is some of the stuff that I love about playing these games, but at the same time, and obviously time commitment is a thing. And I also really enjoy trying new systems. I really enjoy being like, I wonder how this plays, and one shots are perfect for that. So I love going to conventions and just picking, and when I'm looking at what games I want to join in on, not being like less of like that game looks interesting, more like in terms of story, but in just terms of like a game I want to try. I want to try that system. I want to see what that's like, and so I get a lot of enjoyment out of that as well. But ultimately, like if I had to pick only one, I'd go with campaign, just because it ultimately gives more, I think, of the things I want out of these games. But in terms of like the favorite one shot, Kisser Before the World Ends is very high. That was just like it did so much with seemingly so little. But in terms of again, one of the first convention games I played was what was the designer? I think it was Ben Lemon or Lehman, something like that. Lehman, I believe. Polaris. His game, they have his called Polaris, which is a sort of a GM-less, mostly diceless system. And in like the course of a 3-hour game, I had a character who went from trying to reunite various clans to being exiled for like 15 years, ended up married to a woman and having a child, and then having to, when he finally ended his exile, having to talk to his original betrothed and be like, hey, you're one of my best friends, but I have a wife now. And then and having this one of just mechanical moments that really struck with me is it sort of breaks up the characters in certain ways, and I had to move this character from like family relations to like business relationships on my character sheet, and I was just like, oh no, oh, I've really hurt this imaginary person who didn't exist 2 hours ago. So that really stuck with me, just like the amount we got in such a short period of time with this game was always, I thought, quite incredible.
Awesome. Game Beast.
I can't pick. I like them both too much. I like campaigns where I get to make a character and get attached to that character and make a costume for that character and get really involved in that character. But I also so much love one-shots because you get to test out new genres and settings that you might not be sure that you want to play. And you get to test out new characters that you're not sure you're comfortable with the personality or the way you're going to play them, and then you end up having so much fun that you think you want to build that character to play for a campaign, or maybe you're not sure about the mechanics or or you want to build a face character, but you think you are not a very good persuasive person. So you try it out for a one shot and you're like, oh yeah, that is fun. I guess I can do that. So, and it's fun sometimes that Eric hands me a character that I'm like, no, I don't want that edge. I don't know how to make this work. And then we play the game, I'm like, yeah, I can totally do this. This is fun. So I like both too much to pick one. I could never settle with just one. And as for my favorite, I think it depends on which one we have played most recently. So my favorite one shot for the moment is the one we played around Christmas time. And I was a silly little cookie elf. And we got to have so much, like, it was a silly, I know all these people, these deep, like, dramatic games where you explore these deep themes. No, I'm sorry. I liked a silly game where we rescued Santa from Jack Frost, and I was a cookie elf, and we laughed so hard during that game. That is my current favorite one shot.
Awesome. And I can vouch that Sarah's an individual who I will hand a character and will openly be like, no, I don't want to do that. And I'll be like, yeah, do it anyway. And for those of you who love Ghost in Stars of the Bind, Ghost was that character. Ghost was a character that Sarah said, nope, not doing that. And Ghost is great. Matt, one-shot or campaign?
I am a one-shot boy, which might sound kind of counterintuitive with how much I like story and character, but when I'm in a one-shot, I've got a brand new story and a brand new character, new car smell on both of them, and I get to kind of feel my way around both of those. So I really love one-shots for that reason. Also, they do tell you which ones are going to make good campaigns. My favorite one-shot, Savage Worlds Adventure, that I'll call Sprinkles Daggerhorn and the Case of the Missing Princess with my kids.
For me, for Eric, to play its one-shots, to GM its campaigns. But I have always had more fun playing in one-shots than I've had playing in really any campaign that I play in. As for favorite, I mean, that's why we're running out of time, which is why I talked to all the interesting people first. Their reasons were interesting, but I'm so often on this side of the screen, I'm so often the GM that, and I've had campaigns that go south so quickly that I don't ever feel like I can get as much out of them as I want. And so partially it's just wanting for a campaign that sticks out to me. But my favorite one shot to have run would be the very first time I ran my Ghostbusters one shot, and favorite one shot to have gotten to play in is going to shock everybody because it was a Dungeons and Dragons game, not a Savage Worlds game. And I played in a 5th edition game and got to play an Orc Barbarian, and more importantly than getting to play the best character archetype that exists, which is Orc Barbarian, anybody who disagrees is just wrong, is no. You've already had weird opinions about Incredibles, Sam. You don't get to have more weird opinions. But I made lifelong friends at Gen Con who I still talk to. I still send emails and text messages and Christmas cards back and forth, and they were people I had never met prior to that game. And when we went to Gen Con, it was, we have to make sure we have a meal together. We have to make sure we play a game together. And so that one shot is less my favorite because of the story, because I couldn't tell you what happened. But I can tell you that I made friends that I'll have for the rest of my life. So you out there watching this on Twitch, if you want to tell us in chat, we'll be here for a couple more minutes as we say goodbye. One shot or campaign. If you're in the YouTube comments, one shot or campaign and why. But I'm going to do the outros and plugs for people. If you have something I miss plugging, just so we can be quick. Sarah is at Sarah No Tweet on Twitter, which means she will not tweet you back or know you're tweeting at her. Still tweet at her. I am compiling a screenshot for the number of notifications that Sarah has, and I'm going to send it to Sarah, and it will be funny. Sarah will be appearing this week on Do Respite Programming on Saturday in the continuing giant mess that is Somerset City. Speaking of Somerset City, we have the one and only, the lovely Chantel B. will also be appearing in Somerset City. However, Chantel will also be here on Wednesday, appearing in a new game that we will tell you more about, not tonight, but on Wednesday when it kicks off. But we have something new on the channel featuring some new faces that you saw last week in Shadow of the Cone. Chantel's also in 9 million other things, so go and follow her. Twitter, at Chantel B. And then you can see the 9 million other things that this woman does because she's insane. We have Game Beast and Game Freak. However, Sam, I don't know enough about you are the Game Freak, my friend. Sam, I don't know enough about what you do. However, for myself and the audience, I'm going to officially invite you at some point to come and show in a one-shot here on Do Respite. As a player or as a GM, it's up to you, but as a player for sure. So you don't have to answer now. You could totally reject me later if you would like to. But what, besides your podcast where you offer possibly bad opinions about The Incredibles, what else should we be looking at for you?
Well, it's not my podcast. It's a podcast I was on.
Still your opinion.
I as mentioned at the top of the show, I'm in a game called Unlawful Disorder. It's currently on the Royal Society channel at 8 a.m. Sunday Eastern Standard Time, I want to say, which is late for me, but is still fun. It's one of the 9 million games that Chantel's involved in, so, you should watch it just for that.
And it's D&D, if you're into that kind of thing.
We joked at one point that I jokingly accused her of that I was supposed to make a naive comedic character, and because I paired it with hers, I was now this older mentor friend, and then she immediately shot back that she was supposed to make this sort of like femme fatale. Instead, she made a vulnerable teenager because she had this friend whose shoulder she could lean on. And I was like, well, we played ourselves. Look at what we've done. But that's been a lot of fun. I'll be on the Penny Peep Show podcast at some point. I don't know when that show comes out. They do like radio dramas, and they'll have like a show, and then there'll be the next show. So I don't know when the one I did. It's a town called Prodigal is the one that I'm involved with. So I think that's in the next couple of weeks. I don't know. Follow me on Twitter. I'll talk about that.
Yep. And Matt, you are on Twitter at Orcish1_83. You currently are appearing in The Stars That Bind, which is on a slight temporary hiatus due to scheduling reconfiguration here at Do Respite. It will return not this Friday, but next Friday, as it is no longer on Saturdays. It was supposed to be back last Friday, but Valentine's Day was a thing, and our spouses told us we were not playing games that night, so we didn't, because it was safer. So instead, we'll be back next Friday with The Stars That Bind, where Matt plays Hawk. I'm Eric Taylor. This is Do Respite, and Do Respite is my baby. We invest in stories. We tell stories. We're all about stories here. You can find me in most of the things that are Do Respite related that I mentioned. And at present, tomorrow night is the return of Paris by Night on twitter.com/mirrors_shadows. Watch Twitter. Twitch, not a Twitter. Don't go there. You can't watch it there. You can find the link there probably, but you cannot watch it there. Watch Twitter for that. It will be here. We've been filling in for the past while, but it'll be here tomorrow. So if you've been missing Renee and Moonin and Priska and Onweir and being okay with the fact that Kiara's not on your screen, that's the correct version of fandom to have adopted. But again, my name is Ben Eric Taylor. This has been Due Respite. We thank you so much for joining us. And for myself, for Sarah, for Chantel, for Matt, and for our special guest, Sam, good night, good luck, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.